At Shlishi, the pasuk says, "It's Chavav Tezayin." Hayom hazeh Hashem Elokecha mitzavcha lasos es chukim o'eler v'es hamishpotim. Today, Hashem is commanding you to do these statutes, these laws, v'shamarto, and you will retain them. V'asisa osom b'chol levav v'chol nafshecha shecho, and you will do them. You'll actualize them with all your heart and with all your dedication. So Rashi mentioned yesterday, quotes the Midrash. It was at Sinai we were commanded. What's Hayom Hazeh? So again, Rashi says to Chazal, Chol Yom Beinecha Chadoshim, that every day we engage in the mitzvahs, in our obligation, it should be as if it was given today, as if it's new. Because if it's new, we spoke, it has that unique character to it, and therefore a person does it with greater interest, greater involvement. You go further, Chav Zayin Tes, V'daber Moshe v'Kohanim haLevim el kol Yisrael le'mahaskes u'Shema Yisrael. The Kohanim and Levim, they say to the Jews, Haskes, be attentive and listen. Hayom hazeh niyeso lom l'Hashem Elokecha. Today you become God's people. So Rashi again says over here, B'chol yom beinecho, ki lo hayom bo se'imo bivris. It's not only when you do the mitzvahs, there's a person has to relate to it with its special uniqueness. And it's the equivalent the first time you're experiencing it. So you give it your full attention, your full focus. But even in regard to understanding what is the basis for the obligation. The bris, when you entered into the covenant, as if today you entered with him into the bris. The relationship it's the first time. It's like a person is waiting to meet, to have a relationship with somebody unique, and you've worked a whole life to have this relationship. And finally, you're going to secure the relationship. We're not talking about levels of obligation, we're talking about relationship. So not only does one have to have the mitzvos, the obligations and the way you have to behave and invest every aspect of your life in all those levels of involvement that has to be chadoshim, but even in terms of your relationship with God, whenever we speak about why am I bound to this, it's like when we first met, that moment which we were waiting for and we were yearning for, you relate to it as if it's being actualized that first moment. The two aspects of this uniqueness, the relationship and the obligation, when you heard what that entity wanted from you. You know, we say every day before we study Torah, and if you get an aliyah, we say a bracha, Asher bocha bona b'kol ha'amim noslo nos toroso. We acknowledge Hashem that He chose us of all the nations to give us His Torah. We say Chai olam notan sochenu. He planted with us Chai olam, in eternal life. Now the question is, when you say Asher bocha bona, do you feel pride? Do you feel that's something special? Or it's just a fact. He chose us for all nations. He gave us that Torah. So now I have this level of obligation, more than all the other nations. Or when you say, it's predicated on Hashem Elokeinu melech olam. God, Hashem is Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei represents God is infinite. Elokeinu Almighty, Melech, King of the universe. Who chose us to be of all the nations? We're not talking about an ordinary entity chose us. It's the Creator Himself, who's unlimited, who's absolute. He chose us. And what did He choose us for? To give us His Torah. That means He chose us to give us his Torah, he didn't choose anyone else. Evidently, that is the most special level of acknowledgement, of value of who we are. What level of pride should you have? Well, you say every morning, you say Birchas HaTorah. Every time you get an Ali, you say those same words. But yet, every morning we say, after we say Birchas HaShachar, we say Ashreinu Matov Chelkeinu Ma'anoim Gorleinu Ma'yofi Shoseinu. Ashreinu Matov Chelkeinu. Fortunate, how special, how good is our portion. Uma'anoim Gorleinu, how pleasant is our lot. Uma'yofi Shoseinu, how beautiful is our inheritance. We say it every day. I mean, when you say those words, do you feel as if you just got a call from the executive in the state that you just received $1 billion? Or you have levels of real estate that you don't have to pay tax on, and it's going to be managed, and you don't have to be distracted with it. I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel that pride, that excitement, or that good fortune? But we say the words, Ashreinu Matov. We say Oleinu. When we conclude the davening, we say Sheim Ishtachim Lehevel V'Rik U'Mispal Le'Lo Yishia. They bow and prostrate themselves to worthlessness. And who do we bow to? Melech Malchi Amlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We bow to the King of Kings, Hashem himself. And who is he? The Creator. When we say Modim in the Shemoneh Esrei, we give thanks. What is the first thing we give thanks for? For the good, all the good he does for us. Modim Anachnu L'fonech Shato Hashem Elokeinu. That's the first thing we give thanks for. That you're our God. And then we speak about the other things. The miracles, the wonders, the goodness. His goodness doesn't cease. But first and foremost, what do we acknowledge? That you're our God. That you took us. What do you mean? He's everybody's God. No. Hashem Elokeinu. In the Krias Shema, we say Elokeinu. The Almighty, there's a personalization between the Almighty and us, not with the nations of the world. We give thanks for that. But that's first and foremost. Everything else follows. That's secondary. It pales to that. So when we say all these things, what goes through our emotion, our minds? And we bow. We give thanks. Shato Hashem Elokeinu. I mean, this is what we talk about when we start studying the Amidah, the Shemoneh Esrei. You have to have certain things in mind, and those, whatever you have in mind has to affect you emotionally, has to touch you. Because you're having an audience with God. That's what you're having. The Gemara in Baruch says, what's the difference between Krias Shema and the Shemoneh Esrei? One is a declaration of your belief. That's Krias Shema. Shemoneh Esrei is Komid Lifnei Melech. When you say the Amidah, you're standing before the king. And which king? Before God himself. That's who you're standing. When you stand before God and you're totally inept, and in his presence you're nothing, how should you feel? You should feel a level of humility. And I always give the example. Person, whatever his life's accomplishment may be, and he meets a person that the other person's life accomplishment is endless times greater than his. I always say, we speak about what's the difference between why, when a person has reverence, true reverence, why does he have fear? You hear the question, Mark. Reverent, yira means fear. So you could fear on many levels. One could fear Yiras Shamayim. You have fear because God could punish you. Or you can have what we call Yiras Shamayim. You revere God because of this exalted level, because you have some degree of understanding of who he is and who you're not. That's reverence. If you truly revere someone, simultaneously there's a fear aspect. There's a fear component. Why are you afraid? He's not going to hurt you. Give you an example. I always give the example. Person was graduated as a high school student, even as a college student, and his major was physics. And because he was top of his class in physics, so they told him that he's going to meet Professor Einstein. He's going to meet Einstein for a cup of coffee. And he's going to go to Princeton, and Einstein is going to just shoot the breeze with him. This student of physics, when he meets Einstein, there's a degree of what? A fear. He has butterflies in his stomach. So the question is why? If you meet Einstein, I meet Einstein, wouldn't have butterflies in my stomach. But the person who values himself as a physicist, he's going to have butterflies in his stomach. Why? That's the question. What gives any human being a sense of value? What gives you a sense of value? What gives you a sense of value is your level of accomplishment. Who am I? A person is a wealthy man, and as a result of his investment of his life, he achieved and he succeeded. So what, if you want to quantify the person, who is he? He's he's the creator of his success. That's who I am. You know who I am? I'm this, I'm that. That's who I am. That's who I am. But let's say a person has nothing to show for his life. Literally. So what is he? He feels inadequate. He feels inadequate to everyone else. And therefore, that's the reason why he has a self-esteem issue. Person has a self-esteem issue. He feels inadequate when he meets people because he feels they're something and he's less than that. So the moment the person, if the basis for the quantification is what your sense of accomplishment, and you come to a level where you realize your accomplishment is literally not much to talk about, because you consider yourself this physicist, which is a tremendous accomplishment versus people who know nothing about physics. But when you meet Einstein, you realize whatever my level of accomplishment is, it's infinitesimal to Einstein. Automatically, your essence is minimized, and it's not valued much in your own eyes. It has nothing to do with the way Einstein values you. It's the way you compare yourself in terms of what you are versus him. I'm not that much accomplished. The moment your evaluation becomes minimized and lowered, that causes fear, because the basis for confidence and your sense of self is based on who you are and what you accomplish. And who you are is what you accomplished. I'll give you an example. Person reaches age, his father built a business, and he decorates an office right next to his. It gives him a title, senior vice president. But the son knows he doesn't know much about the business, and he's only there because his father put him there. Even though he could write checks and everything else. But he knows who he is. He knows he doesn't deserve the position, and he's only there because his father put him there. So what's his sense of self? Who am I? I'm a nothing. The moment you feel you're a nothing, automatically, that creates a certain sense of fear, uneasiness. Not because your life's going to be taken, not because you're being threatened. It's a sense of value. When you say, Modem Hashem, Modem Anachloch, Shato Hashem Elokeinu, we bow to you because you're my God. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. God who's infinite, who's the Almighty, who I have a personal relationship, who's the King of the universe. So who am I? You're less than a speck on the spectrum of existence. So if you relate to that and you're able to internalize that, which is not easy, then automatically you stand in shame in God's presence. What I should be, and especially if we fail on our watch because we're not meeting up to his standard, and he knows that we haven't lived up to his standard. You're shameful. It's like a person's caught in the act of lying or stealing. Here I'm presenting myself, I'm supposed to be something, and I'm not who I'm supposed to be. In the presence of God, who knows that I'm not who I'm supposed to be. And yet I stand before him to make requests. Creates shame. creates fear. That's the concept of entering into an audience with God. Krias Shema is just a declaration of your belief. What do you believe in? Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's my belief. It's not just you feel you stand in the presence of God, but Abida, it's coming Lifnei Melech, and therefore the decorum, which is demanded of a person during Shemoneh Esrei, is different than what's demanded, what it says the Shema. Even a person is not dressed appropriately, as long as his genitals are covered, he says the Shema. If a person is not dressed appropriately, even though his genitals are covered, he's not qualified to say the Shema, because you don't enter into an audience and stand before God in this type of attire, because the attire is totally inappropriate. Based upon our perception of whatever it may be. Although, give you an example. We say you meet a person very special. You're impressed. There's a rule of thumb. Somebody's truly special. The more you get to know him, the more you're impressed. Somebody who's not so special, although he has a certain persona, but if the truth he's not that special, the more you get to know him, the more you realize he's not as special as originally you thought he was. You would meet Rav Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. If you read the biography on him, it's like you're amazed as you turn the page and you realize more and more of who he was. You're more amazed. Another person, you thought he was something. You start reading about his life. He's overvalued. But initially, you're impressed because he's more. But when you realize with the shortcomings, with all the more, he's not that much more as you thought he was more. But the person who initially you didn't appreciate that he was more, you knew he was more, but the more you realize how much more he is, the more you're impressed who he is. That's what it is. When we speak about Gedolei Yisrael, the Torah sages, the Torah leaders, true Torah leaders, because it's not only their tremendous Torah knowledge, their standard of ethics and morals, just as their genius allowed them to grasp Torah at a different level, their personal behavior, how they evaluated, how they valued things, how they related to things on a moral ethical value, it's beyond what an average person understands or has sensitivities to that. And the more you hear, the more you understand, the more you're amazed who these people were. That's what it is. You meet a person, the Gemara tells us that in Amoritz, the Gemara says this, that when he meets a Talmud Chacham, a Torah sage, he's impressed. But as he becomes familiar with the Talmud Chacham and he has a relationship, that awe becomes minimized and it's downplayed. And eventually, he sees him almost like a peer. You may know more than I am, but you realize you're not much different than I am. And it compares it to this. The Gemara says, initially, the Amoritz valued a Talmud Chacham like a golden vessel. You only use a golden vessel on special occasions. And you're very careful. Because of its value, you don't use that often because it could get damaged, it could be dented. But a silver vessel, although it's made of a precious metal, you're not as careful. So initially, the relationship between the Amoritz and Talmud Chacham starts as a golden vessel. As he becomes more familiar, he takes on the perception, he's like a silver vessel. And eventually, he becomes like an earthenware vessel. An earthenware vessel, as we learned in Shabbos, it's not glazed. It's clay that's not glazed, so therefore it absorbs whatever you put into it. Eventually, it becomes something which is saturated with uncleanliness. You throw it into the trash heap. It starts as gold, silver, but when he really becomes familiar with the Talmud Chacham and he's no longer impressed because of the familiarity that he has with Talmud Chacham, puts him like trash heap. And that's the way it works. So if you stand, like Ernie mentioned yesterday, you stand Shemoneh 3 times a day, and you become familiar, becomes almost habitual. How do you maintain that recognition, although we know who God is, but that sense of awe, of reverence, that every time we stand the Amidah, we have a sense of reverence, we become familiar. We've been here 1,000 times. We've said the same words 1,000 times. But how do I have a sense of awe or inadequacy when I stand in the presence of God, or shame because I feel He knows what I'm not, which I should be? How do you maintain that cognizance? The Mishnah tells us in Brachos that the Hasidim Rishonim, the earlier Hasidim, this time in the Mishnah, they would prepare an hour, they would reflect and meditate an hour before they enter into the Amidah. To be able to overcome all your physical limitations, you have to go into deep meditation and to reflect and keep thinking about, what am I about to experience? Because only after that level of reflection, and we're talking people who are knowledgeable, who are Hasidim, we're not talking ordinary people. So these are the people with that capacity, with the sensitivities. Because they have those sensitivities, they realize to approach whoever they're approaching, to have an appreciation for who that is, or what that is, you need an hour preparation to reflect, to be able to relate to whatever's within the human capacity to quantify what that experience is going to be. So they would spend an hour in preparation to enter into the Amidah. And then when they said the Amidah, they spent an hour saying the Amidah. And after they finished the Amidah, they would reflect on the experience to be able to absorb and be a full beneficiary of what that experience was. And they would do this 3 times a day, 9 hours a day. This is just the Shemoneh Esrei. Samar asks, if a person spends 9 hours a day just saying the Amidah, how much of the day is left to study Torah, to earn a livelihood? How much is left? So the Gemara says that because they were Hasidim or Rishonim, their livelihood came easily to them. Hashem provided with almost effortless. They took an initiative, immediately they had the success, financial success. The Torah they studied, full retention. They didn't have to review that much. To be able to come upon its understanding, they merited special divine assistance to be able to understand what they were studying. Why? Because they were Hasidim Rishonim. Because they understood what that relationship with God was. And they invested so much to appreciate that, to revere Him, whatever He is, and absorb it within the capacity of what a chassid is. Therefore, Hashem says, if that's the case, I give you a gift. The Torah is a gift. The livelihood is a gift. To be able to appreciate what your value is in this existence. That's the understanding. Introduction, what a blessing, what a curse is. The Gemara tells us, Al tia birchas hedjit kalavedecha. Even when an ordinary person blesses you, you should not take it lightly. Don't minimize the blessing even of an ordinary person. Al tia birchas hedjit kalavedecha. Al tia kilas hedjit kalavedecha. God forbid, if a person curses you, even if he's an ordinary person, you should take it seriously. Don't take it lightly. Don't dismiss it. Because you never know how far that curse can go, even though it's coming from an ordinary person. So here we're speaking about an ordinary person. Don't minimize his blessing. Don't minimize his curse. So a person is more than a hedger, more than an ordinary person. When he blesses you, what is the value of that blessing? And God forbid, if he curses a person, what is the seriousness and the ramifications of the curse? God forbid. It's endless. The Gemara tells over the story towards the end of Brachos that Rava, there was a person, he was a dream interpreter. His name was Bar Hedja. And Rava didn't know that when you dream, that the interpretation of the dream will determine how that dream manifests itself in the person's life. So Abai and Rava, both being colleagues, they went to this Bar Hedja who was the dream interpreter. They had identical dreams. But Abaye would give him a fee. Every time he went, he would give him a fee. And the interpretation was always phenomenal. Phenomenal. And Rava had similar dreams, but because he didn't pay the fee, the dream was always interpreted on a catastrophic level. And whatever, the way it was interpreted, that's what happened. He lost his livelihood. He lost children. His wife died. This Rava. Later, Rava Bar Hedjo was going and he dropped a book, a manuscript. He picked it up and he read it. It had to do with dreams. And it said in the book that dreams are determined by the way they're interpreted. And he understood then that the reason why he interpreted dreams the way he did was because he didn't give him the fee. He gave him a fee, all of a sudden he started to interpret it differently. When he realized that, he said to Bar Hedja, he says, I forgive you for everything. The reason why he gave him the negative interpretation because he didn't give him the fee. So he suffered unlimitedly because of what? This man was denied the fee. And the suffering was unlimited to Rava. Rava's wife, her name was his wife was the daughter of Chisda, who was the leading Torah sage of the generation. He says, I forgive you for everything. But that you caused my wife to die, that I don't forgive you. I don't forgive you, and I curse you. So this Bar Hedja, when he heard that, he was a Jew. He fled to Rome. Fled to Rome. Why did he flee to Rome? Because the halach is, the law is, the reality is, when a Talmud Chacham curses, it has very, very severe ramifications and consequences. So he figured by leaving the location, he'll be less subject to the curse of a Talmud Chacham. The curse of a Talmud Chacham, it will find its mark in a very serious way. He fled to Rome. And he said, I forgive you for everything, but for my wife, the daughter of Chisda, for her being taken because of your negative interpretation. So I said something interesting. He lost children, he lost his wealth, he lost his health, forgives him for everything. But that his wife, the daughter of Chisda, was taken from him, that he doesn't forgive him. So the question is why? You'd say maybe he took his wife. Didn't say he took it was the daughter of Chisda. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that when a wife dies, God forbid, she only dies for the husband, not for the rest of the family. Meaning, for the rest of the family, they go on with their lives. But the wife, we're talking about the original wife of a man, which it's really the level of bonding, it's at a core level. When that person is no longer alive, it's like part of that person died. Therefore, the person doesn't recover from that. And it says, Ein Baal Meis El Ishto. And when a husband dies, God forbid, the same thing happens to the wife. It's like part of her is no longer alive. That can't be replaced. Time doesn't heal that. It heals to a degree, but it's not the same. The rest of the family go on with their lives, and they fully recover. But the husband, the spouse, doesn't recover. Ein Isha Meis El Labala, Ein Baal Meis El Ishto. That's more in Sanhedrin. But Rav said more than that. He didn't say, you took my wife. You're the cause of my wife's death. You took my wife, who was Basra of Chisda. What difference is it? I mean, Rav was a leading Torah sage of his generation. So what if she was the Basra of Chisda? So what? So I understood. The Gemara tells us, in Psochim, there's a positive commandment, bo tidbok. You have an obligation to cleave to God. So the Gemara asks the question, if God is fire, how do you cleave to God? So the Gemara says, you know how you cleave to God? If you marry a Bas Talmud Chacham. Since the Talmud Chacham represents God, so marrying his daughter, who was actually mentored by her father, and her whole persona and her genealogy is connected to her father, and her father represents that entity of holiness. So when you marry his daughter, you're attaching to God. Bo tidbok. So when he caused Rav Chisda's, his wife was Rav Chisda's daughter to pass away, that component of his attachment to God at that level was no longer there. So everything else is the physical. His children, his assets, whatever it is, his health, that's his physical. But Bas Rav Chisda, what she represented, what Rav Chisda was, which was the ultimate level of Botidbok, he attached, he cleaved, he says, that I don't forgive you. That was the curse of Rava. So now we have the Jewish people, and they're told 6 of the tribes go on one mountain, 6 of the tribes go on the other mountain. In between the mountains, you have the Oron, you have the Ark of the Mishkan, and you have the Leviim, who are the tribe who did not sin with the golden calf. And they turn in one direction, they say, Baruch, blessed is the one who does this, this, and this. Cursed is the one who does this and this and this. They're expressing and displaying whatever they're doing because that's what God said they should do. So they're only the conduits for the blessing, for God's blessing, and they're the conduits for God's curse. Orur, cursed. You know, the Kohanim, cited in Shulchan Aruch, a Kohen, when he duchens, he lifts his hands and he separates his fingers. He has to hold his fingers in a certain way. The 4 fingers, the 2 are separated, and there's an opening between his fingers. What is the significance of that opening? There's a discussion. Mishnah Berurah says this: if a Kohen is not such a special guy, he's even in Russia, but he's a Kohen. Is he qualified to do it? But of course, he believes in God. But he's not such a, he's a card-carrying member, but more than that, not much more than that. Does he go up to Duchen? Do you want his blessing? So the Rambam says, it's based on Psukim, that when the Kohanim bless, it's God blessing you. They're only the conduit for Hashem's blessing. And when they open their fingers, it's like you have windows. That through that, in terms of the symbolism, through those openings, Hashem's blessing, it's a pass-through. It passes through upon him. So that's the bracha. We say, Yivrach Hashem Yishmerecha. When they say that, Kos Yivrach Yisrael, it's Hashem blessing you. When they stood on Har Gerizim, Har Egel, these 2 mountains, it's God is blessing you, and God forbid, is cursing you. Orur. The Leviim, as I said, they are the purest. They were chosen to be the officiants of Hashem. And what's there? The holiest vessel of the Mishkan is between the mountains. So what is that level of representation? That's the ultimate level of representation of the Shekhinah. And therefore, where is this all emanating from? It's directly from God himself. That's the Orur, and that's the Baruch. Tzaddik goes to Kodesh Baruch Hu Mekayim. Although naturally a person, something's not supposed to happen, but if a tzaddik decrees it should happen, it happens. And Hashem is willing to change the decree because of the blessing of a tzaddik, or because of the dictate of tzaddik. Tzaddik goes there by Kodesh Baruch Hu Mekayim. Famous Gemara, Medrash, based on the Pasuk. The Malach is bound to God, but the tzaddik is able to override God. Because if he decrees it, God will follow the decree of the tzaddik. You have stories. Person is not meant to have children, but if he gets a blessing from a very special tzaddik, all of a sudden things change. And his wife's able to conceive, he's able to father a child, or whatever it may be. How does this happen? Tzaddik goes Kayim. The tzaddik blessing, Hashem goes and changes nature. Nature could be overturned, which is a miracle. It may not be a revealed miracle, but it's a miracle. Just tell you a story, a very interesting story. Many years ago, a father, this person, his wife was a granddaughter of Rav Shimon Shkop. Rav Shimon Shkop was one of the leading Torah sages before World War II in Europe. He mentored all the Gedolim, the Torah sages of the next generation, many of them. And this person was married to his granddaughter. he came from Antwerp, this person, and he married one woman, and he had a brother-in-law married the sister of his wife. And his brother-in-law had studied in the Mir in Europe, Mir Yeshiva in Europe. And they lived in Israel at the time. This is after World War II. And one of the sisters, she was married about 12, 13 years. She had no children. And she went for a blessing to Rav Kalatsky Levenstein, Zechat Tzadok Levrocha, who was the Mir Mashgiach in Europe. He was known to be a very holy man. He was the Mashgiach in Panovich Yeshiva. And he went for a blessing. They went for a blessing, they should have children. They had no children. They married 13, 14 years. And he said to them, in a year, you're going to have a child. And they had a child. The sister really was married 16 years. She had no children. And the clock is ticking. And her sister, the one who didn't have children, said to the one who had the child, I'm worried, the clock's ticking. Eventually, it's going to be beyond. I'm not going to be able to have children. She says, you know something? I went to Rav Kalatsky Levenstein. I received the bracha. Go to him, he'll give you a bracha. He gives you a bracha, guaranteed you're going to have a child. Okay? They go to Rav Kalatsky Levenstein for the bracha. I'm hearing this from the father, and he has two sons there. He had twins sitting before me. They go to Rav Kalatsky Levenstein, and they say, we're going to bracha, marry, I may not have children, this and that. He says, pray. We'll see. Hashem may help, may not help. And they walked away disappointed because they know if Rav Kalatsky doesn't give you that full force of the bracha, it's not happening. She goes to her sister and shares it with. So they say to Rav Kalatsky, my brother-in-law, he gave a blessing. He had a child. Why don't you give us a blessing? He says, I'll tell you the reason. Your brother-in-law, I have a debt of gratitude to. Why do I have a debt of gratitude? Because in Europe, when the Mir students needed visas to escape Lithuania, to go to Lenin, to go to Kobe, and eventually Shanghai, he was involved in the visa process. So I owe it to him. I have a debt of gratitude. Because of the debt of gratitude, I gave him the blessing. That's why I have the child. I have no obligation to give you that level of blessing, because when the tzaddik is a blessing, he's actually drawing on his status with God. You never know what that blessing cost the tzaddik. Therefore, I have no debt to you. I have no debt to you. Therefore, I'm not giving you a blessing. I won't give you a blessing. That's what he said to this couple. See, she goes back and shares it with her sister. And the sister says to her, there's one thing that Rav Kalatsky Levenstein cannot tolerate. They see a woman crying and sobbing. You have to go back and you have to present your case and request and start crying and sobbing. And even if you have to throw yourself on the floor, on the ground, that you're broken to that point, because Rav Kalatsky cannot tolerate to see a woman crying at that level. And when he sees you, he'll give you a blessing. So she goes again. He says, but I already told you. And she starts asking, and she breaks down crying, and she throws herself to the floor, and Rav Kalatsky can't handle it. Can't handle seeing a woman crying this way. So he says, stand up. I'll give you a blessing. You're going to have a son in a year from now, but not only one son, two sons, twins. These two boys who were at the 20s at the time, who were in my home with the father, they were the two sons that were born for the blessing of Kalatsky Levenstein. And he says, not only that, I will be the sandik by both of the sons. This is a year before it actually happened. Tzaddik goes at Kodesh. So here you have the Leviim, the tribe that never was tainted with the Chet Egel. And they're only doing God's bidding. You turn in one direction, you say Baruch. God forbid, you turn in the other, you say Oro, cursed. And you have the Oro, which represents the Shekhinah, the divine presence, with clearly they're only the pass-through for the blessing, God forbid, for the curse. That is what this was all about. And this is an eternal imprint, blessing, and God forbid, curse-wise, what the Jewish people carry with them. If they fail in either of these areas or succeed, either you're beneficiaries or you have the most extreme level of consequence to the negative.
Right.
Which is fascinating. Korov Hashem Chol Korov. Chol Hashekru Emes. You're an ordinary guy. Korov Emes doesn't mean you called him sincerely. If you're a representation of Emes, that means tzaddik. In the way you serve him, the Torah you study, which is Emes, Hashem's close, that's Korov. When he calls with truth. That's his credentials. His credentials is Emes. When your credentials is Emes, Hashem is attentive to that person. That's the tzaddik. Tzaddik goes at Kosh Baruch because when he calls with his credentials, which are Emes. It goes beyond just the
Rabbi, if I can just change for a second. You were talking before about the gold vessel, the silver vessel, and the clay vessel. And I just had a question on Bikurim.